Hello, my name is Thomas and welcome to this episode of British Culture, Albion Never Dies. Today I'm looking at culture shock, 5 stages and what to do. I think you can find quite a lot of information on culture shock very easily available on the internet, but I thought here I'd just pour in my life experience as I spend quite a lot of time dealing with this. So first, just give a quick insight into why I have such an interest in this. I was born in England, and when I was very, very young, I don't know how many months old, I went to Berlin, where my family was living, so I spent my early years there. I think I've got some very hazy memories of West Berlin, and my first school was in the UK. In fact, most of my schools were in the UK, but then at the age of 16, I went to live in the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, which is very, very, very different, and there wasn't a big community of English teenagers there. Maybe in the south of Cyprus, but the north was very, very separate at the time, and yeah, so I really just fell in with the Turkish teenagers and led a very different life until I returned to the UK as a mature student for university. And ended up working for the university, helping the international students get adjusted to the UK, as I'd had to have a bit of an adjustment. Then I went to work in Saudi Arabia, just 6 months, but I was working with the most conservative Islamic clerics in the country. Someone recently asked me if they're actually relatively moderate when they first met me. I was teaching them English and how to communicate their ideas in English. So I worked, as I say, with the Islamic clerics there. Then I spent 6 months in Oman, back to the UK, and I was teaching at the University of Bradford when I got poached by a Swedish education company that wanted me to work in China. So I went to China the first year as a teacher, then I was pretty rapidly promoted up and up and up and up and up into management, and I was a manager there for 5 years, so I guess 6 years there in total. And then I said, goodbye, I've had enough time in China, I really would like to move on, settle down, start a family, and my wife is of course American. Travelled to America, we got married, and I had a job offer there, which was to be one of their head honchos on the West Coast, restart the company, and potentially end up as the regional director of the West Coast and Hawaii, which sounded pretty good, except for the visa situation. So the American visa situation ended up being so bad that it's been, I think it's been over a year now that I'm waiting, and I'm still waiting for any kind of coherent reply. So, of course, you can't wait around in life indefinitely. I had to come back to the UK, found a job here, started a job here, and much of that's been charted in my Back in Britain series. But again, whether I'm an Englishman abroad dealing with culture shock, or whether I'm in the UK helping others deal with culture shock, I'd say a lot of my life has been, culture shock. So if you haven't come across it, what is it? It's generally defined as a feeling you get when you experience a new and strange culture. I've had people sort of say they've had culture shock just when they're on holiday, which always fascinates me, because, I might get into that a bit later, but it really intrigues me when people have culture shock on holiday. You can have it just moving between the same company. Different divisions of the same company can do things really, really differently, and people can find that tricky to adjust. Fun example, again, one you can easily find on the internet, is how do Americans make tea. I wasn't sure whether this was just baiting videos of people, putting a tea bag in cold water and then putting the cup in a microwave. I always thought that was ridiculous, but apparently this is the way some Americans do it. At restaurants, I've had Americans bring me, a cup of warm water and a tea bag on the side, which strikes me as bizarre. I did have, sensible cups of tea made at Starbucks. So apparently, if you have a professional do it in America, it can work. But anywhere else, I think there's only one place, and it was a little stall in Florida where somebody started to make tea, and an African-American gentleman moved the lady aside and said, "Let me handle this, let me show you." And he just put a tea bag in the cup and poured boiling water into it. Fantastic. So, whoever you are, you made the one good cup of tea when I was in America, out and about. So he has stayed in my mind all this time, because surely it's a simple thing. And I think in a previous episode I referred to essays on how to make a cup of tea. On the other hand, I know that Americans have shocks coming to the UK on why don't Brits have dryers, like clothes dryers. You put your clothes in the washing machine, you wash them, they're wet. Surely, you then put them in the dryer and dry them. But no, Brits prefer clothes horses. Partly, they're cheaper to run, and they don't damage your clothes. But an American in the UK pointed out, a lot of British houses have issues with damp, especially if they're older. So then you're hanging damp clothes inside the house. Although, actually, most of my life we just hung them up in the garden, so that doesn't really count. Anyway, you get these little differences which are hilarious and fun on the internet, and especially, I say, on holiday. I think it's fine. It's just all part of the joy. But when you start to live in a place, and the pressures of life start to get to you, these things do count. Again, I worked at the University of Bradford, and I was talking to the international students frequently, asking them what did they find strange about the UK. One thing I thought was really interesting is they said that British people are very polite. They can seem friendly, but they are not your friend. They'll be a little bit distant. Not everybody found this. I think the Russian students actually found this pretty well similar to their culture. In movies, Russians are often portrayed as really, really cold and distant, but they just don't like to put their emotions in your face. Once they become your friends, they're very, very warm. But if they don't know you, they keep their stuff to themselves, and I think Brits are very similar in that, if we don't know you, we're not going to burden you with our emotions. So I'd say especially those from the Arab world found that Brits were, I say, friendly, but not your friend. And a lot of people found the weather funny. Brits talk about the weather. It's a bit of a stereotype, but it's worth talking about because, you wake up in the morning and it could be sunny, then rainy, there could be a bit of hail, then it gets sunny again. It changes, especially in West Yorkshire, but really anywhere in the UK. If you don't like the weather, just wait 5 minutes, it will change. Of course, if you do like the weather, you wait 5 minutes and it will also change. But you do get, I say, weather in the UK. Other places just have a climate. In southern China, it's hot and humid today. Yes, it was hot and humid yesterday. It will be hot and humid tomorrow. It's been hot and humid for 3 months. There's not much conversation in it. And even though in Turkey the weather does change, when I speak in Turkish, there just isn't the tradition, the culture, whatever it is. There's just not the tendency to talk about the weather in the same way that Brits do. And of course food. Everybody believes their own food is better. It's very, very rare for anyone from any country to say our food is bad. Although Brits do say it, I think it's rarely just self-deprecating humour, to be honest. And lots of non-Brits say, British food is so terrible. And you can say, what British food have you tried? Have you tried fish and chips? Oh yeah, I liked it. I only really like it if it's on the coast, because when I was part of the University Royal Naval Unit, we're always calling in at seaside ports, and they'd have fish and chips. If the fish is caught that morning and is cooked, I have to say it has spoiled me, for fish and chips. But anything else, like the full English breakfast, seems pretty popular around the world. Although Americans do call it an American breakfast, and I'm pretty sure ahead of you there. Although America has also influenced it. I know there are ingredients in it. We talked about this with Kane previously in a deep dive. I think it was Britain, not just the UK. As we talked about, as you travel around the UK, you actually find the English breakfast, which seems so set, changes as you go around the UK. And we both totally agreed London is the worst place for it. For me, my own example of culture shock is really the rules. Like if I went to an office in Turkish Cyprus and somebody started explaining me, these are the rules, they are being unfriendly, right? Because the bureaucracy in the Near East, the Middle East, and indeed the Far East is extraordinary. I mean, specifically, Byzantine bureaucracy, yes, it's still there. So the rules themselves are very, very unfriendly. What you want is to make friends with a man across the counter and say, what's the rules, but I'll help you out by doing this. So, I don't know, playing with the rules, flexing the rules, being friendly. It matters, and you go along, and the best way, really, is you go along, you start to have tea or coffee, might share some nuts or Turkish delight or dried fruit, or you get to know each other, you talk about your family and your personal history, and eventually you might float across what you want if you're going to do it this time and not next time. And he goes, oh yeah, that's reasonable, and he helps you. Whereas if he says, okay, what do you want? No, these are the rules. say, he's being unfriendly. Whereas I went to the UK, and I say, after 7 years abroad at a formative time of your life, somebody on a desk said, right, these are the rules. And they were trying to be helpful, because in the UK people are sticklers for rules. It even gets into our, fairy stories and so on. I mean, King Arthur, for example, has to choose between, his wife and his knights, and it gets into, he must apply the rules in these old stories. But they're trying to be friendly by saying, these are the rules and I'll help you along. But for me, I hear it's the rules and I just think, you don't like me. It's really, really different. So I say these are the things of day-to-day life. And again, ask the international students in the UK, what's the difference between your country and this country? And I used to write it down on a piece of paper, because if you ask 20, I'd then just hold up the piece of paper. Yep, taps. A bunch of them mentioned taps. In most countries, you have a mixie tap. In the UK, we have two separate taps. One for water which is too hot, and one for water which is too cold. And of course, if you want to wash your hands, you can mix them together in the basin, get the right temperature water, but most people just like to get both of them running and go, ooh, as you're moving your hands between the two. Why? Well, like many of these differences, it's historic. Cold water used to come from the mains and was clean and good to drink, whereas hot water used to be up in a tank and it wasn't quite so fresh, so you couldn't drink it, so you never want to mix them together. You don't want them to come in the same pipe. Of course, we do have modern plumbing now, but nonetheless, people have their preferences. Although I have seen mixer taps in the UK. Again, lived in Saudi Arabia. I think my favourite cultural difference was the first time I went to a shopping mall and needed to use the loo. And the signs there are very, very different, because, of course, in the UK and the US, you have those silhouettes of the gentleman in shirt and trousers and the lady in a dress. And even though it might not be how everyone dresses, we all kind of understand it. Whereas in Saudi Arabia, they wear very different clothes. So, apart from reading the Arabic, what you can do is, I think the ladies is somebody dressed all in black, and the gentleman is someone dressed all in white. Anyway, these are my rough examples to get us in the zone. So I realise we're 12 and a half minutes in. If you're doing any little job, this is your knowledge that you've now had your chicken in the oven for 12 minutes. If you started listening to this at the beginning, this may be one of the longer podcasts I've done in a while. I have been doing very short 10-minute podcasts. This is going to be a longer one. If ever you're wondering what decides the length of these podcasts, honestly, it's just the content. If I have more content, it's longer. If I want to say something less, it's less. I know some people have kind of ideas that it should all be the same for their podcast. It should always be half an hour, or always be 40 minutes, or always be whatever. For myself, it's longer or shorter as I prefer. And you can listen to whichever one for whichever purposes suits you. Okay, the 5 stages of culture shock. It goes honeymoon, denial, anger, escape, and maturity. If you didn't have pen and paper ready, that's okay, it's in the show notes. But I'll also be going through them in detail and also talking about the solutions. I mean, honeymoon, well, there's not much of a solution. It's not really a problem. You just arrive. It's lovely. It's just like being on a holiday. If you've been on holiday before to this country, all the better. You get to wander around, you get to see the historic sites, and it's exotic and it's interesting. In Turkish Cyprus, you see the beautiful mountains, you see the citrus fruit growing. In Saudi Arabia, you might be going out to one of the ancient cities. I went to a mud city, and that was actually in the process of demolition, very, very slowly. But I was able to wander around this entire city made of mud bricks. In Oman, you see the gorgeous, gorgeous landscapes. It's desert one half of the year, and in the summer you get the kharif, the summer rains, and it's covered in green. It's an amazing change. But as I say, if you stay in a place for any length of time, you start to see that the rules of life are a little bit different. I think in Oman, it's where I saw a sign outside a shopping mall saying, indecent clothing is not allowed. I found that very curious because, of course, the gentlemen wear the dish dasher, the long white robes, the ladies wear their long black robes, which are actually really different and really interesting in Oman. But what does indecent mean? Does that mean that I'm not allowed to wear short sleeves? That was one of the jokes in Persepolis about the Iranian Revolution, that whilst women had to cover their hair, men had to cover their forearms because the forearms were thought to give out, sexy radiation, I think was how it was described. So are you allowed to wear short sleeves? Not. Are you allowed to wear shorts? In Oman, the answer was generally no. You wear long trousers, and in a lot of places in the Gulf, longer sleeves are preferred, but you're in and out of air conditioning, so it's fine. I think I went for a short sleeve shirt and long trousers in Oman. But how do you know these things? Again, you're kind of looking around, trying to pick up on signals, which isn't something you normally do in your home country. You think, oh, but I like this and I'll do that. Whatever subtle signals may be around, you absorb them as a very young child, most likely. But you go to a new place and suddenly you have to start again, and you're looking around thinking, but what is indecent and what is not indecent according to these rules here? Of course, as you travel around, you do need to respect the local culture. So you start to get into denial. You might say, but no, I want to wear shorts. I'm going to wear shorts. There's not a problem. It won't be a problem. No one's going to say anything. You start to notice problems, but people do start to get to a point where they start ignoring them. So this is where you start to need a solution, which is, is it all in my head? Is this a problem just for me, or is it a problem for everyone? And for this, I always think the best solution is to try and find someone from your country. If you're certainly from Britain and America and you go to a new country, you're probably not the first Brit to go there. You're probably not the first American to go there. And there might even be like a little community. And finding a little community there, one that at least at some point remembers the issues you're having. Oh yeah, I remember when I first came here and that used to bother me. It can actually be a really important piece of validation of, oh yeah, this is a problem I hadn't fully realised. It can be really, really useful. Even if you just want to get together and have a really good complain and rant about that. I must admit some expats in China were a bit boring about this, but nonetheless, it is actually really useful to meet people, some who have adjusted, and occasionally it's really interesting to meet people who've lived in a country a long time and have never adjusted, never become okay with it. People who should probably have left a few years ago, and you see it and think, oh no. Some people are role models and some people are examples. But whatever, it's really, really good to meet your expat community, even if you don't feel like you need it in the first few weeks or the first few months. Just to know it's there can be really, really handy. And of course, these days we've got Facebook groups and all sorts to help you find these people. But whatever, you ignore problems, you try and get through them, you push them aside, but they keep on coming. And as I say, this is especially a problem if you live abroad rather than be on holiday, because you're working, right? Anywhere you live, you end up having stresses. You get annoyed at a boss. You get annoyed at somebody inefficient in another department. You get annoyed at somebody in your own department who's inefficient. You have problems as you go through life. Those problems exist everywhere in the world. If you're in your own country, at least it's on your rules and your terms. You kind of know what they are. You go abroad and suddenly you find you have all the same problems, but goodness knows what the rules are. So you do get those points where people get really, really angry, and that's getting towards the low point of the culture shock journey. But again, you should know they're coming, so you can prepare. And a friend of mine used to call them China days, when China's just too much today, thank you. So he used to close himself away, and he had all his American stuff. He was an American. He'd have all his stuff in his apartment, and he'd prepared for this. He'd been going through the previous few months, like collecting stuff. He'd lived there for years and years, but sometimes it got to him. So he'd go through collecting stuff. What kind of stuff? One in particular useful thing was a hard drive of movies, because living in China is particularly difficult for things like Netflix or Amazon Prime or Disney Plus. Like, you could try and set a virtual private network to another place, but sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't. So there was just a hard drive going around of a bunch of movies, music, TV shows, all kinds of stuff that was going round and round and round in certain offices. It might be food. So for me, this is actually a big thing, trying to get Turkish food in the UK. You can get greasy kebabs everywhere. It seems to be that Turkish food does not travel outside of Turkey. It seems that our worst chefs we send away to other countries. So it's really, really difficult to find decent Turkish food anyway. You can occasionally ship out, say, Turkish Delight. But honestly, it's just not the same made in other countries. So for me, I visit Turkey, fill my suitcase as much as possible with Turkish Delight or Turkish tea or whatever. And then I store it away forever. I mean, my wife comments on it that I've got these secret stashes of Turkish food or even, English sweets when I'm abroad. But yeah, I just have it for those days when I desperately need it. Books, I find particularly comforting. Again, I've got my Turkish books. I read very slowly in Turkish, especially compared to English. But I do read slowly, but I do enjoy it. Actually, I'm working now in a British company in the UK. We had to do some online, health and safety in the office training. But I discovered my company is very, very good about this. You could select it into whatever language is convenient for you. I was able to select it to Turkish. I was able to spend a morning doing a health and safety course in Turkish, and I even had my certificate printed out in Turkish. I was really, really pleased. I've actually got another course coming up in which I'll be doing the same. But these things, I'd say, are really, really useful to store away. Not work courses, because those have to be done on a schedule. But whatever, whether it's books, food, hard drive of movies. Oh, I love Turkish rom-coms. They're so different from Western ones. Really, really like them. Yeah, and it's mostly ladies, teddy bears. Teddy bears that remind them of home. And one lady I knew, I was in China. She lived in the UK for, I think, 14 years. She was Chinese. So when I went home to visit, she asked me for a packet of Walker's crisps. They do have Lay's crisps, which are, of course, exactly the same thing. It's the same company by a different name. But she just especially wanted to have the pack which had Walker's on it, open it up, and have the exact same crisps that she had when she was in the UK. So there you go. It can be all kinds of things, but just having those to store them away in a box, so that when you have those angry days, you can open it up and there's your treasure trove. It's not the lowest point, though. When you're able to pull something out of a box that cheers you, that's not the lowest point, I'm afraid. The lowest point is popularly known as escape. So you've got your routine, you've just about dealt with this new country and its new rules, and so you just I finally mastered this country, or at least my little bit of it, and I always take the same route, and I always go to the same place, and I always have the same food, and I always go to the same, talk to the same people, whatever. But people get tired of it and just really, really want to go home all the time. And of course, these days with Skype or Teams or Marco Polo as a phone app, there's so many ways of communicating with friends back home that some people can end up just, completely wanting to escape, and their mind is just on leaving all the time. And again, it's partly because you restrict down just for ease of working. And you need to do it when you first arrive. Ease of working, you narrow down to, this is my routine, this is what I'm going to do. And then people struggle to break out of that. So one of the most creative solutions I found to this was a couple who, again, in China, everywhere you're going is on the metro, and between the different metro stops, they are actually very different. So what they would do is they would try and visit a different metro stop every weekend. So it's not massive, it's not amazing. They'll just go into a new metro stop, have a little wander around. If there's a coffee shop, stop. If there's nothing much, they go back. And sometimes it would result in half an hour before they go home and watch movies because there's nothing there on that metro stop. And sometimes it would be the whole day because they leave and there's something really interesting. But they wouldn't ask other people, they wouldn't try and research it or network or anything. They just hop on. Certainly when I went from Turkish Cyprus back to the UK for university, I did much the same thing. I just got my day pass ticket on the buses, because the whole of West Yorkshire you can buy a bus pass for one day. It didn't cost much. So I just sit on the bus, and I remember one driver being a bit concerned, like, "Are you okay? Have you missed your stop?" And I said, "Well, it's just my magical mystery tour. I don't know where this goes. I just thought I'd sit on it and travel around." He actually gave me some advice of, you can go to that pub and then just walk down the road, and then you can take another bus and get back down. It's just an interesting walk. So I did. But yeah, just sit on a bus and travel around, and if anywhere looked interesting, hop off. Again, southern China, this was really good because you've got Shenzhen, which is like a completely new city. 30 years ago, the Chinese president drew a circle on the map and said, build a city here. So it went from less than 500,000 people to 14 million people. So everything is new. There are old patches of the city, but they're very rare. The original population speak Cantonese, but many of the people who came in, I mean, they might be from Hunan, they might be from Sichuan, they speak, well, their own local language, but they'll all communicate in Mandarin. So you get this Mandarin-speaking city surrounded by a sea of Cantonese. The food will be very different as well. Whereas then you've got Guangzhou, which is kind of an old Chinese city. It does have like a little island in the main river where there's a British and French sector. So then, again, you can travel there, see something very, very old and Chinese. You can travel around Shenzhen, and it's all new and Chinese. Of course, there's Hong Kong across the border. There's Macau, which is Portuguese. So travelling around this area was really interesting. But I say anywhere that I've lived, in Turkish Cyprus, I went to an interesting museum, not very big, maybe as big as many people's front room, but packed with loads of weird old stuff. And on the ticket it just listed all the museums in Turkish Cyprus, all the government museums, and there weren't that many. So I was able just to make a plan to visit all the different museums there. And they're not much, but it gets you out and it gets you something fresh, and it kind of helps recapture that feeling from the honeymoon stage. So I really, really believe, I say, when you're in that escape phase, just a little trip, not a massive trip, just a little trip down the road, a route you've never taken. Because cities, they all have their nice part and their terrible part. I seem to be very lucky. I seem to have a homing instinct for the nice part. Because I used to travel around West Yorkshire, and I had a friend from here, and every time I mentioned a place, he was like, oh, there's a really dodgy place there, and there's this really grim pub, and there's always incidents there. I had no idea about it. I was always just going along to the nice bit. But he'd always tell me about the terrible bit. Very good to travel together. You can show each other different parts of the same place. But again, West Yorkshire is very, very variable. You've got Bradford, kind of a famous city, and I've read out in my slice of life, frankly, some of the crime that's in that city. Then you get all the little villages that are around it, which are absolutely gorgeous. Then you've got the West Dales, which is rolling hills and very, very beautiful with Betty's tea shop and so on. Of course, I'm very happy here because I went to university here, and then I worked here, I did my master's here, I've come back here. I'd feel for here I've got some kind of maturity, and that is, of course, the final stage when you're settled and happy. I'd say I got pretty mature with China pretty quickly. I was pretty happy with much of my life there, although also happy that I left when I did. But yeah, you do reach maturity, and of course, like many of these models, it's not a strict time frame, it's not a strict model. People move forwards and backwards and forwards and backwards. And so one of the biggest problems with maturity actually is you get to love a country as it is in that moment. But of course, just like your own country, it moves on and changes, and people have nostalgia about whenever, a time when they're happy. It kind of happens with those foreign countries too. They have every right to move on, change and evolve, build new districts, knock down old districts, just the same as your own country. So I do find that really, really interesting. I knew somebody who lived in China for about 20 years, but he was really kind of angry about some of the stuff. He found it more difficult to adjust to the modern China than many of us who'd first arrived, because for us, we didn't know any different. Whereas for him, I say just like as if he'd been back home, he was getting angry and frustrated at changes. Maybe that was just his stage of life. But yeah, there's a really interesting danger of the maturity that you get used to it, but you get used to the particular model of a country as it is. So there we go. Those are the 5 stages. Honeymoon, where you just kind of enjoy it, build connections, build habits, try and find as much as you can. There's denial, but that's really good to try and build connections, just to find out, hang on, is it just me? Is it just me getting annoyed with this place? Is the place fine? Is it just me missing home, family, stuff like that? Or is it genuinely an annoying point about the country? You get your angry stage, in which your secret stash can come in very, very handy. You just withdraw for a bit, enjoy your stuff, and then go out again. It's fine. You do get escape. Just say tends to be the lowest point. We just want to leave and always thinking about leaving. But just escaping somewhere nearby can be really, really helpful. And finally, I say you've got your maturity. Your maturity when you can just enjoy. So those are my 5 stages of culture shock. Those are my solutions. I hope you found this interesting. It's a bit of a break from my slice of life episodes that I've been going into recently. Of course, the most important lesson from this podcast is please make tea right. just Just put a tea bag in the cup, pour in boiling water, and you're good. I mean, add milk and sugar or whatever if you want to, and do stir it. Enjoy. Thank you very much.